2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
Young people today are clearly concerned about the nation's direction. If you listen to the voices of 18 to 29-year-olds echoing across the country today, they worry about the economy, foreign policy, immigration, and climate change. And they appear motivated to facilitate change and ready to have their voices heard. Since the last presidential election, 16 million Americans have reached voting age for the first time. Some political analysts believe millennials and Gen Z voters will bring a lot of sway to November. They don't want government to go away. They want government to live up to what they view as its potential to be a positive force in their lives. A national poll released by the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School indicates that among that age group, 18 to 29-year-olds, more than half say they will definitely vote in the upcoming presidential election. John Delavolpe, the IOP polling director, said, make no mistake, this is a different youth electorate than we saw in 2020 and 2022. And young voters are motivated by different things. Economic issues are top of mind. Housing is a major concern. And the gap between young men's and women voters and their political preferences is pronounced. Thanks for joining us on Path to the Polls. I'm Bruce Hamilton, and joining the discussion, political analyst Daniel Cronrath, and someone who is very much fitting the voting demographic that we were talking about, Leah Ferrell. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Mr. Bruce.
So, Leah, let's start with you. Most younger voters these days are issue-oriented, and they're not candidate-oriented. That said, I feel compelled to ask for either you or your contemporaries, does Donald Trump, having been convicted of 34 felony counts, does it make a difference when it comes to the question of supporting him in his bid for re-election?
I think the thing that we have to consider, like on a fundamental level, as far as this question is concerned, is how much sort of changing of electorate minds is happening right now. I personally believe that if you did not make your mind up about Donald Trump after January 6th, your mind is not really going to change either to support him or to retract your support from him. So I kind of think that, again, like I said, people's minds are already made up.
January 6th, you're talking about the riots on Capitol Hill.
Yep.
So, Daniel, needless to say, there are a lot of progressive Democrats who thought this guilty verdict would be a silver bullet, if you will. You think this conviction may ding Trump in the short term, if at all, but become long forgotten come November? Because November is quite a ways off.
No, I think any kind of Democratic sentiment that this was going to be some sort of silver bullet, it might be a silver bullet, but only to the Biden campaign. I think what you're going to find is that there's a lot of anger out there, and there's a lot of opinion among Trump supporters, among the Make America Great Again folks out there, that this is just another example of our government overreaching, trying to attack their guy, former President Trump. And the one thing that you can definitely expect is you can expect that core base motivation that Trump had in 16. I remember at the time I was living out in Lake City, Florida, Bruce and Leah, and we had record turnout in Columbia County for Donald Trump that had exceeded all historical expectations. I think as we move closer, if with this prosecution, with the potential of one of the other cases potentially starting before the election, as Leah suggested, I don't think you're going to see anybody's mind change to Trump. I think you're going to see a reinforcement and a mobilization of his voting base, maybe even greater than what he enjoyed in 16 or 20.
And all you have to do is look to the fact that he's raised, if you believe the campaign, $141 million over the past couple of months, and certainly in the weeks since that verdict was handed down. And for those who argue that this charge was politically motivated, they maintain that, the perjury charge against Bill Clinton was something that should have gone to trial. The campaign documents case against Joe Biden was something that should have gone to trial as well. So among voters, especially in that 18 to 29-year-old age group, who are Trump supporters, I already mentioned that if you talk with people in your age group, Leah, you'll find that they are focused more on the issues than they are on the candidates. And the fact that they are more focused on the economy and the pro-Palestinian protests, is that spurring a generational shift in U.S. policy toward Israel? And do you think that may prove problematic for President Biden?
Well, I think furthermore, and I'm going to bring in a few different elements into this, but I don't think it's just Israel and our foreign policy towards them and our continued support of them, regardless of how you feel. But that being said, I'm looking at the fact that as a I'm going to obtain my bachelor's degree this November. I'm looking at the fact that me, my boyfriend, who's also going to obtain his bachelor's degree, two highly educated people in today's economy cannot even afford a single-family home. We are still going to be, you know, pinching pennies. I'm seeing the price of gas go up. Any sort of unavoidable expenses are really going up. And so that being said, it's just this mounting resentment when you're looking at over $100 billion sent to Ukraine, to Israel, all of these things that are a major concern. And then in addition, the fact that there's more transparency than there has been for previous generations, just that being there's more media channels, there's YouTube algorithms that can take you into rabbit holes about financing different militaries and all the political, you know, elements at play that are sort of enhancing the distrust that we have in our present day government officials.
Yeah, and a little later on this broadcast, I want to talk about the fact that many of these politicians don't know how to talk to your generation. But in talking specifically about the economy, I know that the Biden administration says, you know, economically we're not that bad off, but when you go to the grocery store, you go to fill up your tank, you know, those are the relatable issues. Do you think that that's where the problem lies? Because you can't afford groceries, you can't afford rent, you can't afford the things, and that's where the Biden administration, in your mind, is missing the mark?
Well, I think it's not just the Biden administration. I think that it's really on both sides, because even when we're thinking about things like culture wars that are happening with, you know, regardless of how you feel about it, DeSantis saying that all bridges that have lights or whatever this summer are just going to be lit up with red, white, and blue. So then it's like people are concerned about their representation of like their community being featured and like that sort of thing over the summertime. But again, that culture war is not going to put food on the table for families that are pinching their pennies. It's not going to keep our public schools open and operational and provide high quality education to students regardless of their economic background. It's not going to allow, you know, people to become more financially stable or really have a lot of hope for the future. And so it's just, again, like I said, it's just exacerbating pre-existing resentments. It's really just not doing anything for everyone or anyone in my view. So I think that we just need to focus on what's in front of us and what's actually a legitimate priority, and not listen to people that don't have our best interest at heart and what they consider to be priorities and that sort of thing.
You used the term culture war, and you said lighting up our bridges red, white, and blue. So there's another culture war that's going on, especially here in Florida. Does that bother you that members of the LGBTQ community can't see the colors lit up on the Acosta Bridge because of the attitude here in Florida, specifically the governor?
Well, I think it does, but and not just because I might be, say, more left-leaning than some viewers or anything like that. I identify as independent. But that being said, it's just because, for me, it's a symptom of a deeper issue that I think is really eroding our sense of community, communal obligation, regard for other people.
Is it a dogma?
Yes, I would say, but it's not just limited to one side. It's just we're not having conversations in the same way that we used to. People are not having, you know, a lot of family time, friend time. We're not meeting together to discuss ideas. And like I said before, and Cronrath, you spoke to this as well, we're not even at a point where people's minds are willing to change. So we're so politically and ideologically inflexible at this point that it's, yes, manifesting in culture wars, bridges being lit, but on a deeper level, it's manifesting in unfair pay for workers, a lower quality of life for people, generally speaking, the erosion and degradation of our public school system, things that really do impact us on a deeper level in our day-to-day. But we, again, are prioritizing things that seem important, but in my view are really not in our best interest.
And Daniel, you and I have talked about this before. People don't want to have a dialogue. You know, they're very closed-minded. They don't want to listen to each other.
Yeah, it is very, very polarized right now in the United States. One of the things I wanted to piggyback on what Leah was saying too, is I think a lot of people, just me not being of your generation, but working with people from your generation, they understand that a lot of these issues that Leah is talking about, her inability to afford a new home, these are decisions of political will. We are actively making the decision in the United States not to say, for example, program $45 billion into ending homelessness. And the reason I cite that is there was an organization recently which did a study that said for $45 billion, we could take and we could build a modest home for everyone who's homeless in America's 100 largest cities. And what do? We say, well, how are you going to pay for that? Where are the money's going to come from? Yet Leah's generation is watching us send over $100 billion 5,000 miles around the world to the Ukraine, to Israel. And I'm not suggesting that these aren't righteous things or we shouldn't be doing this, but nobody ever asks where's the pay for that? How are you going to fund that? So her generation is saying, over $1 trillion in credit card debt, $1 trillion in mortgage debt, $1 trillion in student loan debt. And nobody seems to ever ask the question, why are we burdening her generation, Bruce, with expenses that, quite frankly, you and I did not have to bear? We didn't, you at one point in time, we said this before, you could go to the University of Florida back in the 60s and 70s, work a part-time job, maybe a full-time job over the summer, part-time job, and come out with almost any student loan deal. I challenge anybody to try to go to even a public university today and get out of that without just insurmountable debt, which Leah and her peers are facing because they're going to be having to address that. And I think while I find all of these issues very, very important, just to disclose, recently in Jacksonville we had a big debate over the removal of Confederate monuments. And Mayor Deegan, of course, took a lot of heat because she fulfilled her campaign promise and ended up pulling the one in Confederate Park. Several years ago, I went to a meeting to discuss the Confederate monuments, and there was a young family that came in. They were from the East Side. They were African American, a mom with several kids. And she sat around and she listened to everybody else pontificate and talk about this very important issue. And then she said at the end of the day, so once these monuments come down, what are you going to do to help fix my DNF school in the neighborhood where I live? What are you going to do to repair the playgrounds? And I think for me, this kind of to me, is an encapsulation of what Leah was trying to say. We really get focused on it. Again, not to dismiss the issue. Confederate monuments, in my opinion, should definitely have come down a long time ago. But then at the back end, when we really get into those things which can alleviate poverty, increase hope, increase health outcomes, all of these things which are important to a lot of young people in the poor neighborhoods, we fail. We don't do the job that we should be doing.
Yeah, it goes back to the neighborhood. So, Leah, all things considered, what is or are the biggest issues for you and your generation?
I think for me, it's just future prospects and hope, and just, I'll say this. I hear a lot of people say, America's going downhill. All empires have to fall at the end of the day, and we're in decline, essentially. But even though, and again, the culture war would have you think that maybe I'm not a patriot because I don't have an American flag waving outside of my house, or I don't have a big truck or something like that, and whatever else, all the other regalia that goes along with that, or all of that. But that being said, it's just the fact that I just want to be able to look at my country and have hope. And I also feel like we're at a point where there's so much cynicism, especially in my generation, because I'm thinking about things like, Social Security, and the fact that there's no money when we're talking about programs that would really just better our quality of life, but then it's going all out the door to Ukraine and Israel, mounting resentment, all of that. And so I feel like as a self-identified patriot, it's my duty to not, tuck my tail and run away and go live in a different country or something like that. I want to dig my heels in. I want to invest in my community. If that means that I pay less attention on a national level and I start campaigning or participating in community initiatives, if I start maybe volunteering at homeless shelters, or really what I want to see is more support programs for the middle class. I'm first generation college graduate in my family, and so that sort of lifting my family up out of poverty as well. I want that to actually mean something, and at this point, basically a bachelor's degree is the new GED. Your generation was able to start at entry-level positions, work their way up, and have a pretty high quality of life just for going to high school, because the public education system invested in our children. It provided quality education. It was not perfect by any means, but there was hope for the future, and it was understood that if you invest in yourself, there will be a return on your investment in the future. And at this point for me, I essentially have to pursue a master's degree, again, possibly incur even more debt, which would, dwindle hope of being financially stable and that sort of thing. So I just want to see, alongside with my own personal future, I want to see more investment in our communities. I want to see more support programs for our middle class. We're talking about homelessness, but at the same time, if you're middle class in this country, you can afford to have a healthcare plan, you can't afford to use it. You can afford to pay rent, but you can't afford to buy a house. There's so many different things that are going on that I feel we just need to really just reprioritize properly. We need to invest in our communities, and we need to make sure that the important things stay important.
Yeah, there was just a study that came out a couple of weeks ago, and it basically said that you know, most people can't afford to buy a house, and the majority of people can afford to rent, if even that. You teach political science. Do you hear the same thing echoed among your student population?
Well, I do, and let me add something else too that I think Leah and I have discussed before, because I met Leah at Jacksonville University. I'm an adjunct faculty member at JU here in town, a private liberal arts college, and Leah is going to be, she's one of the very, very many young, bright, capable graduates coming out of the program. What we forget too is there are individuals out there who do not go to JU. There are people who are patriotic, good people, quality Americans, who may not be equipped to go to a four-year university in a private college. And we have a responsibility as a society to make sure that these individuals can find jobs too. The one thing that always resonated with me, with Leah and with her classmates, is even though they're going to a liberal arts college, they all recognize the need that high school graduates and people who want to work with their hands and people who want to have labor jobs have got to be able to make a living and be able to what the same thing that Leah wants as a bachelor's degree graduate or a graduate school graduate. Folks who want to weld, folks who want to pick up our trash, folks who want to be auto diesel mechanics, whatever the case may be, they need to have those same on-ramps to life that Leah is going to have right now and starting out with a lot of debt.
And that's a good point, because there is a great need for, I'll use the term, for those vocational skills, those hands-on skills. And I've got to tell you that my youngest son, he didn't go to college, and I can't begin to tell you how successful he is right now and how proud I am of him. That there are people out there who, you know, need to fill those voids out there and can be successful, but they need to know that the opportunities exist for them to gain those technical skills and fill those gaps, and need to be paid a decent wage as well, so that they can afford to have those houses and that health care as well. Every
member of a society needs to have value, because every one of them is going to play a part in building the kind of nation, building the kind of state, building the kind of city that we want to live in. Everybody has to Leah brought up education before too, okay? You think about the amount of work that somebody who's a K through 12 educator in Florida puts in, and what we're asking them to do as a teacher raising our children. And then we think about the challenges they have, you know, in the summer getting summer jobs because they're regular, while they need the time to recover in their life from teaching our children, they can't afford that, okay? So it's not just the trades. I mean, at every single level in our society, we need to be looking at, we need to be saying, what are we providing? What kind of futures are we going to be providing? Some opportunities. And Bruce, I'm going to tell you something there. To my way of thinking, and this has been studied, there's a lot of correlation when you look at communities where a lot of blue-collar jobs have lost, and things like addiction, fentanyl death, okay? Because these are deaths of hopelessness, and they're addictions of hopelessness because we've taken away their economic vitality. And I don't want to see that happen to Leah's generation. I don't want it to happen to mine, but mine's halfway to the, you know, finish line at this point, right? So, but we have to make a better world for Leah.
And let me go back to this closed-minded attitude, and people get caught up in what they think exists out there. American Airlines flight attendants right now are fighting for better wages. And if you talk to these flight attendants, they'll tell you, we have to live on food stamps because the wages are so low. Or you talk to, there's a segment of the community right now in St. Johns County who are fighting against the building of affordable housing because they think that affordable housing means Section 8 housing. No, affordable housing means for the people who work in restaurants, for the teachers, for those who work as first responders and things like that. You know, they want to build houses that they can afford, and they can't get them because houses that are affordable to that segment of the population, it's not available. So people get caught up in terms like that.
It's the classic NIMBY, not in my backyard. We recognize we need a school. I don't want to build across the street from me. We recognize we need workforce housing for people who are middle income, but I don't want that in my neighborhood because it'll lower my property values. I mean, this is, you know, it's been with us in a lot of things that can improve the quality of life and the vitality of our communities. We just don't want located where we happen to live, right?
Absolutely. And I just want to say this as someone, I'm an AmeriCorps member. Obviously, like, this is my own opinion, but that being said, it's like you're working with a lot of people in the community that...
Go back to what you just said so that it's not lost on people. You are a what member?
AmeriCorps member.
So tell people what that is.
So essentially, you know, there's a lot of nonprofits that operate. A lot of the big names are like Sulzbacher, other things like that. But because there's not a lot of money in nonprofits, as far as like profits, it's nonprofit, you need supplemental employees to kind of help carry that burden. And we are employees that are provided by the federal government and through grants and that sort of thing to just kind of like help with whatever mission that nonprofit is trying to address. But that being said,
Was that President Clinton who started that program?
no, it was
That was Job Corps.
Job Corps. Okay.
Yeah, it was Job Corps. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because we went on there. But that being said, we were talking about...
You're talking about your volunteer work.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sorry. Thank you for getting me back on track. But that being said, you know, you're working with a lot of people in the community. It's like, I guess my biggest issue is, even though the left and the right will tell you that they're very distinct and different in their approaches to issues and their ideas of what the solutions are and their behaviors and that sort of thing, I'm seeing still consistently that NIMBY attitude. Everyone is loud and proud about issues until it's inconvenient for them, or it actually requires a personal investment or modification in, like, you know, their understanding of the world and their worldview. It's easy for me to have kind of take a narrative about homelessness and run with it until I have to sit down and actually discuss what, you know, someone's going through that's actually experiencing
because the key word in
homelessness.
there is me.
Yeah, and so it's empathy, and we're profoundly lacking that because a requisite to empathy is engagement with another individual. But we're so, you know, locked into our devices, we're letting the algorithms on Facebook and YouTube and TikTok dictate our worldview, and we're not actually going out into the world and experiencing it. And so for me, it's just like the issue with mixed income housing, even though people won't say it, there's a level of classism, of a sort of an allergic reaction to poor people, not wanting to associate with people that we would consider undesirable. But mixed income living, it's proven through studies. When children, adults, teenagers, all types of backgrounds are surrounded by people who may have had opportunities that they never were afforded in their lives, it gives people hope and understanding that I can invest in myself. My present does not have to dictate my future, and so I can contribute. And, you know, back to the other portion of the conversation, yes, you know, your son is a very successful person and maybe he didn't go to college, but still I believe that, you know, people that may not have that capability of being, you know, entrepreneurs or whatever else it is, or highly engaged at, like, you know, a high level making money and being productive in that way, still deserve a quality of life. So whether it's the Publix, you know, grocery bagger or someone with Down syndrome that's working just a manual job, we still have a communal and social obligation to provide for those who may not have a lot of...
I think you know, and we discussed this, I think that we lose track of the fact that every human life has value.
Absolutely.
And not everybody is going to be able to contribute in the same way as somebody else. But I mean, whether it's a matter of faith or whether it's a matter of basic humanity,
absolutely,
we need to value people more than what we are right now in this political.
And we're losing that sense of connection.
Who are we to devalue whatever that contribution is? And I worry that social media has become antisocial.
Absolutely.
Go back to something I said at the top of the program. Since the last presidential election, 16 million Americans have reached voting age for the first time. And some political analysts believe millennials and Gen Z voters will bring a lot of sway to November. They don't want government to go away. They want government to live up to what they view as its potential to be a positive force in their lives. Sarah Suzuki is the chief researcher at Tufts University's Center for Research and Information. It studies the politics of young Americans. She said they are democracy voters. They do believe strongly in the idea that government can and should work. That's fundamental. Leah, do you subscribe to that?
I definitely subscribe to that. I think a major word that flashes in my head when I think about government working is accountability. And that's another thing, you know, we talked about the Trump trial, and that being said, a big thing with that was $130,000 paid to someone, and it was a sort of, you know, political investment. I pay you, I'm investing in your silence for my own political gain. But that being said, it's discouraging when you see, and even though, you know, his campaign is saying that it was political, some people may disagree with that. That being said, it feels like there's a inconsistency in the application of rule of law. And so to me, it just further, I guess, discourages me in the sense that I feel like it delegitimizes the rule of law when we apply it in some instances, but we're not applying it in others. Because paying someone or receiving a payment for political gain, I mean, what is lobbying?
There has to be equity.
Yeah, there has to be equity, and it's like, so what you're doing is you are blocking out information, or you're silencing constituent, contribution in that. So, if Stormy Daniels had said things, maybe the election outcome would have been different. But again, with lobbying, I'm paying you for your political gain to, add funds to your campaign to make you a bigger figure in this stage of politics at the expense of your constituents and without regard for their input as well. So I think, too, if we're going to apply it in one circumstance, in order to actually maintain any sort of legitimacy with it, we have to apply it across the board. So I think that that's something that's been on my mind, and I feel a lot of people in my generation.
But there has to be polite discourse.
Yes,
and there has to be the attitude that we can agree to disagree on other
Absolutely.
things. Right? Coming up, how might the newest field of younger voters change the election landscape, if at all? That and more when Path to the Polls continues after this quick break. Welcome back to Path to the Polls, talking about the impact of younger voters 18 to 29 on the upcoming elections, joined by political analyst Daniel Cronrath and Leah Ferrell, who is right in the midst of that demographic. So the newest crop of these voters are something that we have on the scene, at least according to research, who are something we have not had on the scene in decades: pragmatic. Leah, that describes the voting habits of you and your peers, dealing with things sensibly and realistically rather than theoretically?
So, unfortunately, I'm going to slightly disagree with that, but not to the extent that,
That's okay.
You hear a lot of, like, boomers, as they're so called, not to offend
I hate labels, but I use these terms kind of to bring us to a point of discussion.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a proud Gen Xer.
No, everyone in my family is, like, they're all old and boomers, and I love them, and my parents are Gen X, so you guys are very cool, too. But that being said...
and I'm older than boomers, so...
I don't know what you are, but it's all right. But that being said, I think, unfortunately, and it's kind of going back in the conversation when you asked me, do I feel like our present day, like, politicians are able to connect with my generation? And unfortunately, I would say in negative ways that are a little bit more subtle. But that being said, when we look at these large social media companies, Facebook, Meta, X, all of those sorts of things, they have these very powerful algorithms that tap into what your interests are. And so that's not really, like, regulated in a way that I feel that it should be. And so what I've noticed is when you click on a Palestine-Israel war reel or something like that on TikTok, it just takes you further down that rabbit hole. So whether you support Israel, you're going to be more passionate about that than you otherwise would be, or if you support Palestine, you're going to be more passionate about that than you otherwise would be. But that being said, when you're on your phone and watching TikTok all day, you're not having conversations with people in real life. You're not aware and attentive to the needs of your community. And so again, I feel like a lot of the decisions that we are making in my generation and a lot of our political attitudes are not dictated by our own critical thinking, by our own rational thought, to the extent that we would benefit from, but rather a lot of it is dictated by the algorithms and what we're being exposed to. So I have family members that are calling me from California, Northern Virginia, things like that, saying, why are you still staying in Florida? Why don't you transfer schools? Why don't you do this? Because they think that, you know, Florida is this cultural war zone. And maybe in some regards, yes, but I'm still able to get an education. Like I said, I'm an AmeriCorps member serving in my community. I don't have, like, you know, neo-Nazis chasing me down on the street, but they would think from watching social media that that's what my day-to-day living is. So I feel like people are disconnected, and I feel like, again, their sort of perspectives and conclusions are not fully their own.
You know, and I think the problem is that people think that these issues are black and white, and they're not.
They're not.
Yes, you can support Israel, but that doesn't mean you don't feel for the plight of the Palestinian people. Yes, you can support a woman's right to choose, but that doesn't mean that you're saying, okay, everybody can go out there and get an abortion. I mean, it is not that simple, Daniel.
No, it's not. We try to make issues binary code, like we're doing programming, like it's got to be a 1 or a 0. But the reality is we live our lives in grayscale, and we're not. You know, all of us will have varying opinions about something that we are allowed to hold more than one thought in our head at once. Okay, you can say, wow, what Hamas did, the attack, you know, with the loss of civilian life as Israel was tragic, and we condemn that kind of violence, and we condemn Hamas as a terror organization. We can also look at what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing, and we can say right now with 37,000 dead in Gaza that this is not a proportional response. And to this end, I think that a lot of the disconnect that we're seeing generationally that we need to be reminded of is Leah's generation is getting her information through a lot of social media platforms, whereas people who are boomers and above are still getting their news through legacy media outlets. And that coverage and what's being presented is very differently. And it is very, very different. And if you want this to, a real clear manifestation of this is when retiring Senator Mitt Romney from Utah made the comment that we need to get TikTok banned in the United States. And he said, literally, because we can't control the content which is finding our young people. Now, that's a send to chill anyone who's a First Amendment freedom of the press. That's a send to
Controlling
chill.
content.
That should be send to chill down our spine.
That term.
That's exactly what it is.
Right.
Essentially, we can't exercise prior restraint like we can with our typical legacy media outlets. And why? To Leah's point, because now a human is not controlling what's being streamed. An algorithm is being used to control what she's seeing. And you can't filter and edit those images which are coming out of Gaza, okay, and not have somebody of Leah's generation look at this and say, as an American, what is going on here? You know. And by the way, just, you know, I was thinking about this on my way here today. If you think about the civil rights movement, Bruce, and Leah, in the 1950s and the 1960s, one of the biggest contributors to civil rights in the United States was the advent of the television set. People across the United States now had actual images to see from the South, from the beating of peaceful protesters, of African-American teenagers, such as Axe Handle Saturday here in Jacksonville. The smartphone is creating the same revolution that we're seeing right now that the television did. You can't filter or deny the images that we're seeing from combat regions across the globe and then asking yourself, what is the response? And by the way, I think it's important to note, I'm going to be very interesting to talk to people who are your age about both the Democrats and the Republicans in Washington inviting Bibi Netanyahu to address Congress, okay? If you're talking about something which is going to have a chilling effect of her generation, why is a guy that the ICJ is potentially labeling a war criminal coming to address our Congress? Now, look, if you're pro-Israel, I understand we're allowed to have that difference of thoughts. But I think a lot of these divides are generational. It's kind of my bigger point.
And you talk about those images. It worries me that artificial intelligence can skew those images. And you know what? You talk about mainstream media and what they have to put out. I'm somebody who sits there and I'll go to, you know, 50 or 60 different sources and I will find a common thread before I believe anything. And that's what people are going to do. So Daniel, boomers, you mentioned them.
Sure.
They peaked and they don't traditionally vote, but that could change. These younger voters are not a finished product. Knowing that, how much of an impact they could have on a run for the White House in November, and how might it impact the outcome, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. You know, I would love to see in Leah's demographic a 50% turnout voting for President of the United States. And yet, I'm cynical because the number one effect that a lot of negativity in our politics typically has, Bruce and Leah, is it depresses participation, okay? It also decreases what we refer to as efficacy. A lot of people of Leah's generation feel that her vote doesn't matter. Even as agitated as she is and these things that we've talked about in this lovely program that we would like to see changed in the world, she still may make the decision not to vote because she doesn't feel as if she has efficacy. Okay?
Well, let me ask you, do you feel like your vote counts?
I don't feel that it counts on a national level, and I think that, as I was saying before, I just feel like my AmeriCorps term has really opened my eyes to a lot of local realities.
Because you're involved there.
Yes, and
it's the issues that
yes,
matter.
and I think speaking to another thing, we talked last time about regardless of what your family looks like, the fact that family dinners are disappearing, we're not connected in the same way that we were before. Having political conversations with your relatives now, it's very, very touch and go. And that being said, I just feel like, again, this sort of outburst of protests and that sort of thing, it's speaking to a larger problem, which in my view is a lack of hope for the future, combined with a lack of sense of sort of belonging or purpose. Because when you have young people, it's like, I have so much potential. I'm going to school for a reason, and I'm waking up and going to work for a reason. I think that I'm going to be able to do things in the future. But when people don't feel like they belong to a community, they make a community, and sometimes the features and attributes of those communities are not going to be entirely desirable. But again, that being said, when I'm actually out in the street seeing the fact that downtown is a ghost town, I'm afraid that gentrification and development is going to push out people who have been here consistently disenfranchised. We make investment in this city and also on a national level when it's convenient, when it helps people on the top. But I'm looking at...
Well, we don't have neighborhoods here.
No, I mean, Jacksonville's weird because it's so big that we don't, but we do. When you go to the east side, I work in the jail on Tuesday nights, and the women at CTC are wonderful. People are saying, I'm from the east side, I grew up on the east side, I remember going to the stadium and that sort of thing. But going back to what I was saying before, whenever I'm on my commute, I'm seeing more and more of those little signs, that people put in their front yard saying, save such and such elementary school.
Which is why this has become a big issue, saving the schools at Atlantic Beach Elementary,
Holly Hill Elementary,
when it comes to closing the schools, or when it comes to the stadium of the future, when people say, investing in the community.
But at the same time, it's it's an afterthought, because if we are going to put, and I combined all the totals, but it's $150,000 or $150 million that the city is going to contribute into community initiatives.
Compared to $1.4 billion.
Yes. The Jacksonville Jaguars say that they are going to match that contribution. Okay, it's $775 million is what the city, through taxpayer funds, is going to give to a private company or organization, the Jaguars, in the hope that it's going to attract, a long-term economic, more income, I guess. But that being said, it's not going to make the Jacksonville Jaguars go to the Super Bowl anytime soon. Again, it's just building more resentment. You have totally degraded public schools in that area. The east side is just, it's not, there's such a low quality of life there, and you're telling us in the same breath, we don't have enough money to keep your public schools open. We're going to instead funnel all of our students into a higher, bigger classrooms, putting more stress on our teachers, like Mr. Cronrath was saying, and just, again, reduce that quality of education. But in the same breath, you're telling me that all of a sudden we have over $500 million to invest in a stadium. So when I'm working on the ground and that sort of thing, it's turning my attention more to local issues, and I'm starting to view a lot of the international things as a little bit more of a distraction, but just because they're not directly impacting my quality of life, and maybe in an indirect way they are. But I can't cry for the whole world, and I can't support the whole world. And we're talking about Israel and Palestine. I'm not hearing talks about Sudan and all the things that are happening in Africa, but there's so much going on. And there's so many ways that you can do good.
Because they're not nuclear powers.
They're not nuclear powers. But that being said, what is going on in your neighborhood? I know people living in major cities. What's going on in Chicago? What's going on in, we're here in Jacksonville. Just walk, I don't know, drive 20 minutes outside of San Marco and you're going to see a completely different reality. So it's just, that's more of my concern. So as far as voting goes, I'm more concerned about local elections at this point than the national.
Daniel, I didn't mean to
First of all,
interrupt you
music to my ears, I almost feel like mission
Sorry
accomplished.
for dragging on.
No, I mean, this is the environment for this. The whole idea of people voting locally and not sitting it out. You talk about the election between Davis and Deegan, and only 1/3 of our registered voters showed up to vote for the mayor of our city. It's kind of mind-boggling, to Leah's point. A couple things I want to add to that, however, too. One, when you're talking about the quality of education and the Jaguars. Believe it or not, we've actually got members on our city council who are ready to give the 12-billionaire Shad Khan the money, and actually want to get rid of the community agreement money altogether out of it, okay? Which is incredible to me, considering the fact that the Jaguars with this match are offering as much money as the cities of Nashville and Buffalo combined into community redevelopment. The second thing that I don't want to see happen, Leah and Bruce, is I don't want to see this become another exercise in neocolonialism, where we go into the East Side and we say to them, oh, this is what you must want because this is what nice people have. This is what the nice things people have, okay? We don't want to gentrify the East Side to the point that those folks who've grown up, lived out East for a generation, now aren't able to stay there anymore because the property values have risen so high, they're getting run out of the neighborhood that they've been living in.
And it's happened in big cities.
It has, and this is something that we have to guard against as we move forward, that this has to be, when we're talking about this kind of money, when we're talking about communities like the East Side, the community must be engaged. It must be something that they want, and this cannot
Consulted.
be. Yes, it cannot be something that we just come in and we're like, well, you know what people have, you know what makes things nice, a Krispy Kreme donut, okay, or whatever the innovation.
Starbucks.
A Starbucks.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Chick-fil-A, like
Or a Soul Cycle, whatever it
That's
is.
right. It
Yeah.
has to be something which is organic. So that's just another point that I wanted to add.
So is the reality that maybe the older voters and the younger voters have more in common than these politicians realize these days and follow the same streams and hashtags? I mean, you follow the trail of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. They're all following the same thing. That's obvious. What do you think, Leah?
I think that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are not putting gas in my car, and they are not paying my grocery bills. So, you know, it's great. And when I want to check out of, you know, how am I going to pay rent this month or whatever, maybe I'll tune in. But I think that, again, and, you know, celebrities have always acted as a distraction from our day-to-day living and all of that sort of thing, not always in a bad way. But I just think, again, whether it's the Israel-Palestine issue, whether it's culture wars happening here in Florida, bridges not being lit up, whatever it is, I think that it's all serving as a distraction from what's important, from building connection with people in our communities, from empathizing with one another, having conversations, being active listeners, like we talk about, that sort of thing. And it's really just distracting us from what's important.
And I think you just answered it, but you know, and we could go on. Your biggest frustrations with the political climate today, be it with Congress, the road to the White House, Florida, or all three?
My biggest frustration, and I feel, speaking as Gen Z, other generations are also going to hopefully agree, is a distinct and profound disconnect from our present day-to-day realities as lower class and middle class individuals, and a just such a, you know, divergence from what actually we need, and a lack of really listening to your constituents and valuing them. I feel like, you know, my opinion or my input only matters every 4 years or every 6 years or whatever it is, depending on the race, but we're not actually being actively consulted, and big interest is louder than an American citizen, and I think that is a very scary place to be in the modern day.
Are we too off the straight and narrow to get back on it anytime in the near future?
No, I think we just need to hold people accountable, and I think that, you know, we just need to actually make sure that we take money out of politics. And then even on top of it, we talked about this in class, and I encourage people to look this up, but I want to see more modern monetary theory applied to social programs, support programs for middle class families, for upper, like, you know, lower class families and that sort of thing. But I think that if we make a concerted effort and we hold people accountable and we don't rely on them to say yes all the time, but we actually vote people into office that have our interests at heart and that sort of thing.
They may have to be people who don't have money to buy their offices.
Yep, absolutely.
Daniel, final thoughts?
Yeah, closing comment, I would think, and this is for everyone regardless of your generation, we need to remember back that when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in the Civil Rights Movement, he was tremendously unpopular in the United States at the time of his death, because there was two things that Dr. King was talking about. One, he was saying things like actual true civil rights are economic rights, and the opportunity for individuals to elevate themselves. This is what Leah is talking about too.
Absolutely.
The other thing that made Dr. King very unpopular at the time was his opposition to the Vietnam War. So if you think about where we're sitting here right now, I often ask myself, what would Dr. King, if he was able to be here today? And the issues are the same. We're still talking about involvement in foreign conflicts that the majority of young people in our population don't understand. And we're still talking about the desperation of hopelessness, because in order for Leah to have the quality of lifestyle, Bruce, that you and I have been able to enjoy in our generations, she's going to have to rack up significant debt in order to do that. And those things are right at the core of Dr. King, and I think that they're still prescient with us today.
Absolutely.
So I'm not good at math, but what, 65, 70 years later, we still haven't learned our lessons?
Sounds right. Sounds about right.
So maybe it's not around the corner where we have.
No, but a lot of the same type of individuals are still in power. So I think that's the biggest
That's where
issue.
we've got to make the change.
Yep.
And that's where on the national level and also on the local
But it
level.
starts at the local
we've got to
level.
have-
I, mean,
we've
I
got
would
to
say
make
that
some change.
before we let Leah's generation take over, can you at least give Gen X a shot?
No,
Like we're still
absolutely not.
marginalized out of it. I mean, we're.
Blah, blah, blah.
In that case, blah, blah, blah may be very productive. Thanks very much for being here, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
You can watch an encore presentation of Path to the Polls tonight at 7 on News4Jax YouTube, News4Jax Plus, and News4Jax.com. I always welcome your comments. Please keep it to topic, keep it civil, even though we can agree to disagree. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.